Oh, I'm on? Thank you. My name is Sensei Mui, and I want to welcome you to the 10 Perfections classes. This course is an 8-week course with 90-minute classes. If you'll note the name there, Instructor Venerable Acharya Mui, underneath there it says Shaku Mui Shinshi. I have to explain a little bit about Buddhist names and nomenclature. We get a lot of names in Buddhism. Venerable Acharya Mui is my public name. Shaku Mui Shinshi would be my lineage name. And this is what other monks call me. The Sensei Mui, which is, I think, on the website, is what normal people call me. I've used the name now for about 30 years, so I figured why confuse my old friends. So I continue using it, and they're comfortable with it. So in Buddhism, every time you study something, you wind up with another title. Every time you get ordained, you get another name, and sometimes it's hard to keep track. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other night, and he was quoting somebody named Tenzin Jigme, and it took me about 3 minutes to realize that was me. Anyway, we're going to talk about the 10 Perfections. The 10 Perfections are an interesting list of things to do. Now, as we see above, where is that little handy thing? Oh, there it is. Thank you. As we, oh, there it is. It says the perfect exercise of the 10 principal virtues by a Bodhisattva. Now this is the classical list here. And Bodhisattva, this word here, is an interesting word because for years it only referred to the historical Buddha before he became the Buddha. And I have to watch my pronunciation of the word Buddha. We're so used to saying Buddha over here, but that's not its pronunciation. And Buddha means the one who understands. So Bodhisattva is the mind that is awake. And the mind has to be awakened before you can become a Buddha. So here's the list. And if we were just going to talk about this list, we could finish this whole course up in about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we never have to see each other again. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. There is a saying in Pure Land Buddhism, the most popular form of Buddhism in the world, that says, to understand one teaching is to know all teachings. And that's because they're all interrelated. The teachings of Buddhism are incredibly elegant in one respect and very, very much interlaced. You can't just talk about one aspect without inferring things about all other aspects of Buddhism. For instance, when we talk about the dana parami, generosity, giving of oneself, we're not actually talking about money. It's common for people to think about dana offerings as being the whole of the dana practice. And this is particularly true when it comes to dealing with monks, because most of us work for dana. We don't get a salary. We get offered money, but we do not charge money unless there's a certain circumstance or a venue which requires us to do so. Generosity is generosity of spirit. It's generosity of giving of oneself. It's actively participating in the benefit of others. We'll go through this entire list during the period of this course, because this isn't the only list. This list is from classical Buddhism, or Nikaya Buddhism. There's also another list. There's a list that comes from Mahayana Buddhism, and it's a little bit later. And we call the Mahayana a movement. It's been called a tradition in the past, but it really isn't a tradition in itself. The Mahayana movement contains many, many traditions, many, many schools. Last count, at least 43 of them, major traditions in schools. But the Mahayana movement means the great vehicle. Well, technically, it actually means the big ox cart. But we're going to call it the big vehicle. You will be amazed at all the bad translations in Buddhism as time goes on. But originally, their version only had 6 perfections. And since they used the Sanskrit scriptures, it is, of course, in Sanskrit rather than in Pali as the original. As you can see, it's pretty similar. You have the generosity, the ethical discipline, patience. There's a little change here with enthusiastic effort, the virya paramita, the dhyana paramita, concentration, and then wisdom. Well, not being satisfied with that, later on, were added 4 more to make 10, not to be outdone by the Theravadins. So they added skillful means, vows, resolutions, and aspirations, something called the 10 spiritual powers, which has to do with clairvoyance, distance hearing, seeing into the past, and things of that nature. And then jnana paramita, meaning knowledge, the collection of data. The more data one has, the more wisdom apparently they're supposed to get. Now, their version creates something called a bodhisattva. Now, one would think that a bodhisattva and a bodhisattva were the same thing. Not true. A bodhisattva is one who is bent on becoming a Buddha. A bodhisattva literally means an enlightening being, one who enlightens others, whether they themselves are enlightened or not. Which brings us to, which we'll talk again about later on this evening, about the difference in emphasis between the 2 schools, the Mahayana and the Theravada, the original Nikaya school. As you can see, the stars indicate that, keep forgetting about that green arrow. The stars indicate that the 2 lists have some similarities, where we see generosity is mentioned in both, ethical or moral discipline is in both, patience exists in both, enthusiastic effort not so much, concentration is in both, wisdom appears in both, the vows and resolution appear in both, one is vows and the other is determination. Then there's the departure of the 10 spiritual powers, knowledge, and other things. And you can see it better on this slide here, where there's a connection and a direct correlation. So there are 5 paramas that are related and directly correlate to one another, and 5 that are different. And the differences all come from the difference in emphasis and attitude that one school had and the other one didn't. So we're going to call this original and reformed movements as a convenience rather than continually using technical terms between the 2 schools. Now, what was the reason for the paramitas? This was a time in history when these appear, about 300 years, 200 to 300 years after the Buddha's death. Times were changing. During the Buddha's lifetime, there was already a tendency to worship him, which he, excuse me, he did not seem very enthusiastic about. He did mention that faith was important. In fact, in one of the suttas from the Nikayas, he mentions 7 types of disciples. The first type being the faith disciple, one who can become enlightened, one who could learn how to follow the path, one who could excel in service to humanity and to himself just through faith. What is really interesting about this particular teaching is that he doesn't limit that faith to human beings. He actually makes the statement, whether they have 2 legs or 4 legs or no legs, whether they are waterborn or earthborn or skyborn, whether they have forms or exist as a formless entity, as a ghost or in hell or another dimension even. If they have faith, they will become enlightened. Then he goes through another 5 kinds of devotees, and the 7th kind of devotee that he mentions is the truth devotee. And this is the devotee which is entirely motivated by the experience of reality as it is. And that's really all the Buddha was talking about during all his teachings, was the human experience. So you have these 2 extremes of devotees, one based in faith and one based in truth. The old style, original orthodox Buddhism, the way of the elders as it's called today, was for centuries very devoted to the practice of the truth devotee. Very strict regime of practice, of teaching, forms and rituals that every Buddhist was supposed to be able to go through. About 250 to 300 years after the Buddha's death, more emphasis started being put on faith, and especially this idea that not only every human being, but every living thing could eventually reach enlightenment. Because definitions were starting to switch. The historical Buddha was no longer as important as the idea of Buddhahood itself. That became more important. The historical Buddha was merely the example that we need to follow. So about 250 to 300 years after the Buddha's death, there was a sudden departure from the idea that monasticism was all that important. This occurred not only in original Buddhism, but also in the Reform Buddhism. The propaganda machine of Reform Buddhism made it sound as if the original Buddhists, the Theravadins, were only interested in people that could go into a monastery. Let me rephrase that. Only interested in men that could go into monasteries. That they were somehow sexist and didn't want women in monasteries. That the monastic training was the only thing that could save a Theravadan. Well, this isn't exactly true, but it's what the propaganda was about. So emphasis in both traditions went to lay practice. Now, lay practitioners can't take 232 vows as the monastic can. Yes, if you're going to practice Buddhism and you want to be enlightened quickly, a monastery is ideal because you have 232 rules. They tell you exactly what you can and cannot do. And once you accept that, life becomes pretty easy, pretty chilled out. You know, most of us can't do that. We have things like family, relationships, needy pets, needier children, even needier spouses, needy in-laws. We may not care about money, but our creditors are obsessed with it. So we have to find money to take care of that, right? So a lay practice needed to be formulated. Well, in Theravada, the original Buddhism, there was a lay practice. It was the 8-vow practice of the Anagarika. Sometimes it was called the Bodhisattva practice because it occurred only twice a month, on a new moon and a full moon. And for 24 hours you went home and pretended you were a monk or a nun. Well, that's a lot of time to pretend. The Anagarika, who is called the homeless brother or homeless sister, depending on how it's spelled, was a lay practitioner who held these vows all the time. They never stopped living those vows, which is kind of cool. The only difference between their vows and the 10 vows of the novice monk is that the Anagarika, the layperson, could handle money, which came in very, very handy because a full monk couldn't handle money. So they used to have these Anagarikas, not quite a layperson, not quite a monk, handling their money, their finances. Cool. Even today in Thailand and Cambodia and places like this where the Anagarika practice is held, it is very common to find the local Anagarika, the homeless brother or sister, held in higher regard than a fully ordained monk because they have to practice real Buddhism in a real world situation, which ain't easy. It's not easy not harming other people if you live in the world. It's not easy to be honest all the time if you've got a job. You know, you get tempted to lie to your boss. You know, why are you late? Well, my child had surgery. No, that doesn't work. It's not easy not being tempted by someone other than whom you're in relationship with. It's not easy not taking things that don't belong to you, like cheating on your income tax or something. And it's certainly not easy to stay unintoxicated. And by intoxication, the Buddha meant the drunkenness, the drunkenness that our own mind provides for us. If I run away with my own ego and I have this inflated sense of self, and then I try to foist that inflated sense of self onto somebody else, that is me being intoxicated, causing somebody else to be intoxicated, and it's not easy not to do that. We all have ego, we all have pride, and so it becomes much more difficult to practice this as a layperson than as a monk. Been there, done that, I speak true. It was also provided the average person to follow in the footsteps of the Buddha. The Buddha had to go through this entire training program of of these paramis.
I can't see your arrow.
Oh.
You have to move the green up.
Oh, I see. Of these 10 paramis in order to become a Buddha. He didn't follow 232 precepts. He followed these 10 guidelines. And a word about that, parami and paramita whether in Pali here or in Sanskrit, paramita, both mean parameters. These are the guidelines that a decent, authentic human being should follow.
Let me pause you for just 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want them to ask questions throughout, or do you want to wait till the end?
Sure, if they want to ask a question, just type it on in. Okay. Oh, okay. If you have any questions while we're going along, just type them into the chat box here, and I'll try to answer them as we move along. Anyway, so they're following the footsteps of the Buddha. During this time also came the formation of what's called the three bodhis, three types of awakenings. In the original Buddhism, it's called the three bodhis. In Mahayana, the reform movement, it's called the three Buddha system. And we have these three ways of becoming enlightened, according to this theory. One is the hearer-disciple way, the Shavaka. The other is the self-taught Pacceka Buddha, who teaches himself how to become enlightened. And the other is the Buddha himself. Now the hearer-disciple actually hears the words of the Buddha, actually has the teaching of the Buddha right in front of them. As a matter of fact, originally the idea was these were the original disciples of the Buddha. A self-taught Buddha, a Pacceka Buddha, can only become enlightened by himself if there's no Buddha around. Well, technically then, there can be no Sravaka Buddhas anymore because the Buddha is dead. We can't hear the Buddha speak anymore. We can't follow in his example by watching him anymore because he's not there. There can't be a self-taught Buddha anymore because the Dharma is available for everyone. Technically, this would have to be true under the definitions given at that time. But of course you have hearer disciples today because we have a Sangha which teaches the Dhamma. We have a Sangha that exists as an example. Can a person be a self-taught Buddha today? Probably. One does not have to be a Buddhist to become a Buddha. That was made clear by the Buddha himself during his lifetime. The last way to become a Buddha is to follow in the footsteps of him. Now, Buddha is an interesting word because the Buddha never used it. Where that word comes from is just after his enlightenment, when he gets up underneath the Bodhi tree and goes out, he runs into a wandering ascetic. And the ascetic says, wow, you look great. You look fit, you look trim, you look brilliant, there's an aura about you, what's going on? And the Buddha says, I am awake. Bodho. And Bodho means, technically and literally, I understand. So the Buddha is actually saying, by using that he has full understanding of what? Reality as it is. And so he calls himself Try saying this 5 times fast. Tathagata. Tathagata means the one who has gone to reality and the one who has come from reality. A constant process of going back and forth to reality to the illusion, from reality to the illusion and back again. This is the goal of anyone wanting to become enlightened. It was a way that was directly accessible, these 10 perfections were directly accessible to anybody of any education, of any kind of intelligence. They just needed guidance. It was directly accessible to both men and women, to children with reason, to old folks who may have been losing their reason. But it was accessible. There wasn't any secret teaching involved with it. It wasn't bound up with special events and special times, like having to go to the monastery for 3 months out of the year during the rainy season and participate in the ceremonies then, or participate in the full moon and new moon services. These 10 perfections were totally devoid of that kind of formality. It was something you just did. It encouraged interest and open-mindedness amongst the followers rather than a blind belief. The notion at that time was, of course, the Dhamma is real. I believe that in the sense that I have confidence it will work for me. We're not talking about blind faith here. We're talking about confidence. For instance, if I pick this Sharpie up and I drop it, let go of it, I know it's going to fall. How do I know that? Because I've seen it millions of times in my life. If you let go of something, it falls down. I would be very surprised if I let go of something and it went up. Well, something other than a helium-filled balloon, I suppose. The idea in Buddhism is that we have confidence in things because we have experienced them for ourselves, which raises a really interesting point about experience. In later Buddhism, there's a distinction made between reality and validity. If I have an experience of, say, a little green man from another planet coming in through this door, nobody else has to see them. If I see them and interact with them, that is my experience. It's real for me. It may not be real per se, but it's real for me. If I go to a store and I see something on sale and I misread the sign and I think it says $9.99 on sale today only, and it really reads on sale for today only $99.99, yeah, I dropped a digit. But in seeing or not seeing that extra 9, the experience of a $9.99 deal is real. It's real for me. It may not be real for the store. It may not be real to the customers that are paying $100 for this thing that I think is worth $9.99, but it's real for me. That is our reality. It is a conditioned reality. Because of the conditions, this is what I experienced. But it is not valid. It's false. So this distinction between what is real for the individual and what is real per se, or valid, arose at this time. And the 10 perfections were based upon the idea that all experience is valid. Or not valid, but real. All experience. It's real in a conditional sense. It's real because the conditions made it so. And this had the ability and the effect of furthering and deepening human experience. And this is really all the Buddha is talking about in all 84,000 verses of the Pali Canon. There's one incident where he explains this quite clearly and brilliantly. He's talking about the world being on fire. Desire is fire. The world is on fire. It's ablaze. No matter where you go, there is fire. Well, one guy in his audience is looking around, seeing no smoke. And he goes, "Yo, Gotama, That was his name, Gautama. What do you mean the world is on fire? I don't even smell smoke. You've been meditating way too long, dude. The Buddha said, by world, I mean this fathom-long corpse and the senses that attend to it. In that statement, it really becomes clear that the only thing the historical Buddha was interested in was how we experience reality. The 10 perfections can be directly realized in one's experience through wisdom instead of being induced by another. Basically what this is saying is, because I have experienced it, I can gain wisdom from it. I have gained data. Through that data, I can integrate all my experience, filter it through that data, and I gain wisdom. It is another way of saying that the older we get, the wiser we become. Our perspective changes the more we have experience. Anything that we experience cannot be unexperienced. It sticks up here forever. Somewhere in one of those little wrinkles in our brain, whatever experience we've ever had going back to our birth is going to be there. This is called kamma in Pali, or karma in Sanskrit. It's a term that the Buddha used in a psychological sense, more so than a metaphysical sense. Every experience, even if it's just the experience of collecting data, affects us forever in some way, shape, or form. It's sort of like watching vegetable soup boiling. You look down at the vegetable soup, and as the bubbles start to appear, maybe a carrot floats up, maybe a piece of a bean floats up, maybe a noodle floats up. In every experience, in every moment of our life, something from our past bubbles up, dependent upon the stimulus that we receive. And in bubbling up, it affects what we think, what we say, what we do. The more we reflect on these things, the more we act skillfully in our lives, the more that karma changes. The idea here is that at the time that we are doing something, or saying something, or thinking something, we cannot do otherwise than what we do. Because our karma, like some sort of tidal wave, pushes us forward. The only way to stop being pushed is to understand our karma. Understand where exactly we are coming from. Because normally we don't know. The 10 perfections is a way of altering that karma by changing our focus. It is an act of compassion that we have, not only on others, but also on ourselves, to avoid future suffering. Because we can look back at what we do, see where we have made mistakes, where we'd stepped on emotional landmines, not only ourselves, but those of others, and how we have hurt ourselves and others, and we can learn from those actions, and then we can repair those actions and avoid the same mistake in the future by changing our present karma. But we don't do it now. We do it in such a way that it affects us in the next moment. There's nothing we can do about this moment. Like there's nothing we can do about any past moment. We can only work on the next moment. Now these two schools, the Orthodox school and the Reform school. That doesn't sound nice, Reform school. Okay, the early Buddhism, the Orthodoxy, saw the Arahant as the ideal. Now the Arahant in the original teaching is the highest level that a human being is able to attain, the highest level of enlightenment. An Arahant is technically, according to the Buddha's definition, a fully enlightened being. Fought the good fight, experienced nirvana in Sanskrit, defeated his internal demons, and now is fully enlightened. And this is the ideal in early Buddhism. He was fully enlightened and he had followed the path, he or she. Now, the Buddha was a historically unique individual, according to this teaching. And how this becomes important in Orthodox Buddhism is that the Buddha says he is the Buddha because he is the first one in this era to understand these principles of reality. He is the first one to promulgate and distribute the teaching in this era. He had rediscovered the path. By his own definition, the Buddha is the only Buddha in this era because he was the one who discovered the way. How did he discover the way? By following the 10 perfections. An Arahant is a fully enlightened being that follows the way. A Buddha is a fully enlightened being that discovers the way. That was the difference. But times change, objectives change, and even definitions change. Later Buddhism redefined the meaning of both the Buddha and the Arahant. And redefining the meaning means that it redefined the significance of each. There arose a distinction between the Arahanto, who is the Buddha, and Buddha per se. Suddenly we weren't just talking about the historical Buddha being a Buddha. Now we're talking about a whole category of being called a Buddha. So the distinction became between the and a. The Arahant was redefined as the final stage before becoming a Buddha. The path is the same in both the Orthodox and the Reform movement. You still have to go through the stream enterer, the once returner, the non-returner, the Arahant stages. But now they're more finely tuned. And once you become an Arahant, you go on to become a Buddha. The primary goal under this new redefinition is Buddhahood itself, not Arahantship. With these different goals, the role of the Bodhisattva and the role of the Bodhisattva change. They change the game. From Buddhism being strictly a monastic thing to becoming a more public, religious philosophy, culture, however we see it. Theravada, the current and only existing orthodoxy, and Mahayana, the Reform movement, both arose historically at the same time. They both coexisted in India, in China, in Sri Lanka, in Indonesia at the same time, living in the same monasteries. The difference was the emphasis, what they emphasized, what their final goal was. It wasn't until about 800 years after the Buddha's death that the real schism between the two occurred. It was coming around 300 years after the Buddha's death at the Third Council. You could see it fomenting, but it wasn't there yet. The causes of the schism are really fascinating. It begs the question, is your glass half full or half empty? The early elders, the original Buddhists, saw that one becomes enlightened so one can better serve others. In the Reform movement, the idea was, as one better serves others, one becomes enlightened. So which is it? I mean, they both sound very similar, don't they? Well, this fellow named Shi Yi came around about 550 Common Era in China and founded a monastery called Tiantai. It survives as Tendai, Japanese Tendai today. And he had this scheme. By helping other beings, I get higher realizations. I gain what is called a provisional enlightenment. That means I become intellectually more enlightened and illuminated, which helps me gain higher skills so I can help more people, more beings, which brings me to complete and perfect enlightenment, which means I can help others, which means they can get higher realizations, which means they can get skills in helping others, which means they can become complete and perfectly enlightened. And what he designed was this spiral that goes up and up and up and up and up until everybody becomes enlightened. Because what he had done was he took the Orthodox and the Reform teachings and blended them together and said, there's only one Buddhism, gang. There's no Mahayana. There's no Theravada. It's just one teaching. We just don't speak each other's language. Now, those are the historical backgrounds of the two schools and the two lists. Now the source. This is an overview. We have to go through all this stuff to really understand what's going on here. The source of the 10 paramita, the Dasa Paramiya, in the Theravadan canon, comes from what's called the Khuddha Nikaya, the minor collection. And in here, there is this thing called the Jataka Tales. There's also these other cool books, List of Buddhas, an Appendium, The Way of the Heart. But here we have the Jataka Tales. Now what they had done was they took all these Vedic stories about reincarnation, put the Bodhisattva's name on it, identified him as the Buddha in a prior existence, and brought it through and showed how he became enlightened. And he mentions this list of the 10 perfections in this book. He doesn't mention it in any prior book. Oh, by the way, should I tell you, the Khuddha Nikaya, this minor collection, was put together about 300 years after the Buddha's death. It's doubtful that he actually ever said any of this stuff. And he certainly would not have authorized the Jataka Tales, because contrary to popular belief, the Buddha did not teach about reincarnation. He taught about rebirth, which is a different mechanism. He sort of poo-pooed the idea of reincarnation. And of course, further explanation, not being wanted, is found in post-canonical commentaries because everybody wants to have a say about something. So they took these passages from the Jataka tales, expanded on them, and created this list and popularized it. The Khuddha Nikaya is the last of the 5 Nikayas. It was put together, edited, compiled, as I said, about 250 to 300 years after the Buddha's death. And the reason it was compiled is because people can't leave things alone. They wanted to improve on what the Buddha said, and so they added this new material to the Sutta Pitaka, the collection of teachings, and added this Khuddha Nikaya to the suttas because they had no place else to put the new material. Khuddaka means small. Nikaya means collection, so it's a small collection, it tells you up front. Mahayana uses the word agama instead of Nikaya. So the agamas are the same books, by the way, just in case. The actual origins of this 10 perfection idea comes from the Brahma Viharas, the heavenly abodes, the home of the gods. It's also called the pure abodes and pure lands. The first one is metta. The first of these pure abodes is metta. And you see they're kind of progressive. The lowest, midland, and highest. Metta is usually translated as loving kindness. It actually means friendliness. And it's the desire that all beings be happy, at peace, and free. In the concept of Buddhism is that if it's not making you happy, if it's not giving you peace and contentment, and if you don't feel freer, then it's not the teaching. Piti means sympathetic joy, happiness over someone else's good fortune, which is real hard if you were the guy that bought the lottery ticket after somebody else bought the winning ticket. Real hard to be happy about that. It's real hard to be happy when somebody you dislike gets something good. Very, very difficult thing to practice in reality. Karuna we usually translate as compassion. In its original meaning, it meant turning away. It is the desire to help others be free of suffering, the desire to remove suffering from the lives of others. And that is done by turning away from our own focus on ourselves and our perceived sufferings. We turn away from that and start working on somebody else's sufferings. We've already got the desire that all beings be happy and free. And we become joyful when they are happy, at peace, and free. Karuna, the way we practice compassion, is to remove that suffering. So there's something you actually have to do. You have to get up and go help someone. Anyone. It's real easy to help a cute child, an attractive adult, a grandmother or grandfather, a bunny rabbit, a kitten, a puppy. These are easy to help. It's not so easy feeling compassion toward a spider, a mosquito, a snake, sometimes your boss. It's not easy to feel compassion toward others whom you don't particularly care for. Which brings us to the fourth Brahma Vihara, Upekkha, equanimity. And this word is often used to describe serenity. Well, what the serenity behind this is, it's the ability to feel these desires of metta, piti, and karuna toward all living beings indiscriminately, whether you like them or not. Even if you dislike, say, name any one of the politicians in the past 50 years, we either avidly dislike them or we rabidly love them. Very hard to be indifferent. Whether we dislike them or not dislike them, we still want them to be happy. We should still feel joy when something nice happens to them, like they don't go to jail for what they did. Or compassion. We should still want to remove their suffering. And so we do this indiscriminately. These things are the root of the 10 perfections. And they're involved in this Four Noble Truths. Remember at the beginning I said that knowing one teaching well, you know all teachings well? Well, in knowing about the 10 perfections, we also have to get not only into the Brahma Viharas, we have to get into the Four Noble Truths, the Shatari Arya Sachani. Dukkha exists. The first noble truth is simply called dukkha, this word. And this is a word that should probably never have been translated. We usually translate it as suffering. It makes the Buddha sound like a real pessimist. It has 32 applications in Pali. Not one of them is suffering. The person who translated that was an Anglican bishop, actually, living in India at the end of the 18th century. And he probably had the line from "Suffer the children to come unto me" in mind when he translated that. Because in Elizabethan English, suffering meant more like to be inconvenienced. Today, in the 21st century, it means excruciating pain. And not a whole lot of people are in excruciating pain 24 hours, 7 days a week. The Buddha is not talking about suffering. But knowing that suffering exists is very, very helpful. Because if we know it exists, it must have a cause, since all things are caused. So dukkha has an origin. That's the second noble truth. The third noble truth is knowing it has a cause, then there must be some way of stopping it, of causing it to cease. Nirodha, the cessation, also has the meaning of getting off the wheel. What wheel? The cycles of ups and downs, the constant wandering through our joys and pains, constantly gaining happiness only to watch it disappear. And then there's the way to cessation. So what is this word dukkha? What does it mean? Well, first of all, it's an engineering term. It was used to describe a bad-fitting wheel and axle. If the axle wasn't properly turned or the wheel not balanced, it makes for a really bumpy ride. It's like having a flat tire that's constantly going thump, 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 thump. As you're riding on that, thump, thump, it's very uncomfortable. Things aren't fitting well together. Therefore, that's dukkha. It was a military term as well. As a military term, it meant missing the mark, which is kind of a similar idea to a faulty wheel and axle, I suppose. They're not fitting correctly. But the exact application is If I am a spearman in battle and I throw my spear at the enemy and I miss, that's dukkha, because now I'm unarmed and he's got 2 spears. Not a good thing. As a social term, it was used as a husband and wife, spouse, relationship, whatever, having an argument in public. It made people feel uncomfortable, therefore that was dukkha. And it was an agricultural term. It meant manure. Our word dung is a direct descendant of the word dukkha. So the Buddha may have been the first person that says dukkha happens. Etymologically, it has 2 sources. One of the sources is bad plus happening. A bad experience. A bad happening. In the 60s, we used to talk about the happenings. Well, this is a bad happening. And it's a bad happening where the mind lays extra coatings onto it, extra textures. Like if you get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, you stumble over a chair. Let's say you've got an ingrown toenail and you hit that chair. Oh, God, that hurts. And you sit down on the floor and tears are running from your eyes because of the excruciating pain. There's suffering. And the pain is horrible and it's immense, and you're grabbing onto your toe and you go, oh my God, this hurts so much. What am I going to do? This is going to become infected. Oh, it hurts so much. I wish I could cut it off. Oh my God, what if it does become infected? Then I've got to cut off my foot. I know they're going to cut off my foot, and if it goes too far, they'll cut off my legs. Oh my God, I'll never play the piano again. This is what we add to a situation. This is the real suffering in the bad happening. We make a judgment. Oh, this is terrible. This is bad. We're going to decide that. And then we're going to act on it. We're going to think about it. We're going to tell people how terrible it was. This is also called a papancha. Now, papancha is a rather innocent-sounding word. It sounds like you could go to any Italian restaurant and order it. I would like a papancha with extra Parmesan cheese. Papancha actually means seepage or leakage. We get this idea, or we have an experience, and suddenly from that experience, this leakage occurs, and it starts spreading out. So this one idea keeps coming out, and that spreads to another idea, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, until you've created a whole new universe. And now you're going to project it out there for the whole world to see. Papancha. Great translation of it is from the Tibetans, and it's called the proliferation of thought, as if one thought is not enough. Just take, for instance, the phrase, the red ball. Right there, you have 3 ideas mixed up in 3 words. The idea of singularity. Red, a color that usually has some sort of emotional connotation to it. What does red mean? Do you mean fire engine or cherries, strawberries? What kind of red? And then ball, a spherical object. Each one of these words has different connotations, different meanings. When we put them together as a phrase, the red ball, it has a unique meaning to everyone that hears it. The meanings may be similar, but there are different memories attached to it, different feelings of pleasure or displeasure or apathy. There are different ideas that arise when we talk about the red ball. The red ball is certainly different than a red ball. So that's how we create these bad happenings. The second etymology, which is even more interesting, is from the words contemptible and emptiness. Usually in Buddhism, when we talk about emptiness, we're thinking about a good thing. Well, this is kind of a bad emptiness. You have dukkha shunyata, and you have sukha shunyata. In Buddhist thought, and we'll get to this a little bit later, matter of fact, in just a couple of minutes, you only have choice between three feelings. Pleasure, sukha, displeasure, dukkha, and I love this one, nasuka madukkha. Sounds like something that they would be singing in The Lion King. You know, masuka madukkha. You know, and then everybody runs off very happy. Anyway, those are your choices of feelings. He's not talking about emotions. He's talking about pleasure, displeasure, or apathy. Anyway, so you have this contemptible emptiness, which is dukkha. And it's like the feeling that there's a black hole that has just descended from outer space, and it wound up right here. And it is empty, and it is sucking everything into it. And I get this idea in my head that if only I have, fill in the blank, I'll be happy. It is desire after desire after desire that something is missing, and if only I could find out what that is, I'd be a happy camper. I would never suffer again. The problem is, as we get these things, we're happy for, a few seconds. And then suddenly there's something else that's missing. Something else that needs to be changed. Something else that has to be grasped and collected and brought into my life. Like if I'm hungry and I want a really, really good steak, you know what McDonald's ain't gonna do? I want a steak that thick. And I want it medium rare. And it's got to have just enough fat on it to make it juicy. And I really want that steak. And I get that steak. And oh my God, it is so good. I didn't have to put Worcestershire sauce on it or nothing. It was delicious. Even the potatoes were good. And I had that steak at 7 o'clock last night. Where is that steak now? Let me show you. That's dukkha. The steak was not satisfying. It went away. It became something else. And it left another hole because I got hungry again later. But this time for Southern fried chicken. The idea of contemptible emptiness is that nothing ever completely satisfies. Nothing can satisfy completely. It goes away. Comes and it goes. The thing that makes me happy right now will not make me happy when I'm not thinking about it. I had a student once that said, I love my son. I will always love my son. There will never be a time in my life that I will not love my son. So I kicked him in the shin. After he said a few unkind words, he asked me why I did that. I said, did you love your son then? He said, no, I was mad at you. Well, then you don't always love your son. Love can be very, very satisfying, and it is satisfying. While we're engaged in it, it's not terribly satisfying when we're not engaged in it. As a matter of fact, it doesn't really do a lot for us when we're not engaged in it. Same like that steak. You know, when I was young, I went on a crusade. I was going to find the perfect girl, and she was going to be my bride, my wife forever. I found the perfect girl. We were together for a little while, and then we discovered she might have been perfect, but I wasn't. So we split up. Then the girl who thought she was perfect met me, but I didn't think she was perfect. Then eventually I found the perfect girl. And we're still together. But she's perfect only because she's perfect for me. It's the only thing that makes her perfect. The fact that I choose to see her that way, even when I'm mad at her. And that happens increasingly more and more as time goes on. And we discover more and more little foibles that irritate people. You know, you get older, you get more irritable. There's some truth to the phrase grumpy old men. What are the origins of this nasty thing which is making our life miserable? Well, the Buddha tells us, now this, monks, is the noble truth of dukkha. Look at this list. Birth is dukkha. Aging is dukkha. Amen to that, brother. Death is dukkha. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Sounds like a country and western song, doesn't it? They're all dukkha, associated with the unbeloved is dukkha. Separation from the loved is dukkha. Not getting what you want is dukkha. In short, dukkha is the 5 clinging aggregates. All this stuff is dukkha. Birth, aging, death. This is stuff tragedies are made out of. So, what are these 5 clinging aggregates? Material form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations caused by our karma, and consciousness. We have 6 of these consciousnesses. Say that 5 times fast. Eye consciousness, sight, ear consciousness, hearing, smell consciousness, sniffing, taste consciousness, tactile sensory consciousness, and mind. Mind is the 6th sense. It was the 6th sense in the West, too. Aristotle listed mind as the 6th sense. And then, with the advent of Christianity, we lost our mind and took that out of there. It was no longer considered a sense because it was related to something else in that view. Material form. Material form is kind of interesting. It doesn't mean like the Sharpie is a material form, but it doesn't mean this thing here. It means the line, the indication of shape, the indications of color, of highlights, of other lines and shapes. There are forms within this form. It means all these forms. And guess what? This Sharpie doesn't exist for you if I'm not here to hold it. So my hands become involved. My face becomes involved. The bell over there becomes involved. The Buddha down here becomes involved. All these forms are involved in the experience of this shape, of this thing. So there are forms within forms. Not necessarily this thing is the form that I'm thinking about, that I'm talking about. Feelings, we've already said that there are only 3 of those. But within each feeling, there are more feelings. If I feel somehow distressed by the Sharpie, then I'm not distressed by the Sharpie. I'm distressed by something in this experience of the Sharpie. So just as there are forms within forms, there are feelings within feelings. And they all cause dukkha. Now, dukkha is not always a downer. Dukkha can be an upper. The problem with the upper dukkha is that because of the laws of the universe and the way things work, good stuff doesn't last. It becomes bad stuff. But then the flip side of that is, and here's the good news, bad stuff doesn't stay bad. Eventually, something good arises. Then comes perceptions. Perceptions are neat because they're basically pattern recognition. When we talk about perception, that's what we're talking about, pattern recognition. And if we don't know or haven't ever experienced the pattern, we make stuff up about it. 1492, New Nuevo Española, the story goes. I think that's the Dominican Republic now. Anyway, the Columbus's ship comes in. It's about 200-300 yards off the coast. Indians can't see him. They've never experienced it. There's nothing out there. They had no way of recognizing the pattern, therefore they didn't see it. But the shaman there could see the way the waves were moving. He knew waves. He could see the waves were moving differently. He saw the birds were flocking around something out there. He knew the way birds behaved. So he knew something was out there. The way the fish behaved. He knew that. Eventually, after scrutinizing and scrutinizing and scrutinizing, and sort of squinting his eyes looking for new patterns, he saw the ships. So he went around and told everybody about the ships out there. Well, nobody could see them, but they trusted him. So he spit in their eye, told them to open up their eyes, and they would see. They had faith in him. He described what they were supposed to see, and because they had that description and that faith, they could then see the ships. This is supposed to be a true story. Of course, I wasn't around to verify it, but I've read it 100 times. So it's got to be true. It was on the internet. It was also in a movie, very popular movie at one time, about perception. So we have to recognize patterns. Unicorn. We all know what a horn looks like. We know what a horse looks like. We put them together. We got a unicorn. Never mind that the original explorers who were describing the unicorn were describing rhinoceros. They never seen a unicorn before or a rhinoceros before, so they described it in a way that they could understand it. Mental formations, karma. Mental formations are our intentions, reflect our intentions towards something. These mental formations have to do with aversion and attraction. If we find pleasure in what it is that we perceive, we label it as such, and we try to attach to it, we try to get it, we try to pull it in. If we have an aversion, we're pushing it away. Every attraction involves repulsion. Every repulsion involves attraction. If I'm trying to grasp at something that makes me happy, I'm also pushing away something that makes me unhappy. The idea here is that we always seem to want what we don't have. And we don't want what we do have. Wouldn't it be simpler if it were the other way around? But we're not made like that. If I'm a fat old man, I want to be a thin, athletic young man. If I'm sick, I want to be well. And everybody will agree that being well is a good thing, unless you happen to make your money off of sickness. Then wellness is not a good thing. Pushing and pulling. This is what mental formations are all about. And it comes together as a consciousness. So, and that involves these things here. So if I see something, smell something, hear something, taste something, touch something, or think about something, that's the form. I automatically have a feeling about it. I give it a label, something recognizable to me. I develop an intention about it, and then I create this narrative and try to explain why this is real. This is the way it is. And this all happens in 1/25th of a second. They've actually measured this at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. It all happens that quickly. These first 4 things happen in 1/25th of a second, and then we tell the story, this narrative, based upon that experience for the rest of our lives. Any questions so far? Are you still there? The truth of the origin of dukkha. What causes this stuff? What causes this clinging, this fabrication of a reality? Well, this is what the Buddha says. The origin is the craving that makes for further becoming, accompanied by passion and delight, relishing now, here and now. That's what it says, relishing now, here and now. There, that is, craving for sensual pleasure, craving for becoming, craving for non-becoming. Okay, well, we all understand this craving for sensual pleasure part. I mean, my God, watch TV. We all know there's something wrong with us. Just watch the commercials. Either our home's about to be invaded and we need an alarm, or our breath is bad and we need Listerine, or our armpits are funky and we need some kind of deodorant, or our spouse is not good enough for us so we need a new one, or we're not good enough for our spouse, therefore we need psychotropics. You watch TV, we need something to make our lives happier. Craving for sensual pleasure. If you're young and have a dime or two in your pocket, you go out to the bars. If you're older, you might read a good book. Or have that steak. That becomes dukkha. The craving for becoming is a little more complicated. I want to be something. I want to be somebody. I want to be the best Dharma teacher in the world. I want to see myself that way. I'm going to call myself that. And sometimes when I become intoxicated on that idea enough, it will happen. Or at least I'll tell myself I am, and I'll tell everybody else I am too. And then the first time I get disappointed in myself, I'll crumble and fall, and that'll be another bad happening. The craving for non-becoming. Okay, we can understand the craving to become something, to be something. The craving not to be something? I don't want to be a fat old man. Who does? Except maybe Santa Claus. He makes a living at it. I don't. I want to be a young Sean Connery. There's an illusion that we have in this life that we're somehow in control of something. Does anybody own a car? No, the car owns you. If I owned the car, I would have control over it. It would never run out of gas. It would never need new headlights. It would never break down. It would automatically know where I wanted to go and would take me there. But it does run out of gas. It does need repairs. It needs oil changes. And no, it doesn't know where to go. I have to drive it. Do you own a computer? Does your computer own you? Do you own your body? No, I don't own my body. Like I said, if I owned my body, I'd look like a young Sean Connery. Or at least a Richard Gere. I would not look like this. Although some people do find me devastatingly attractive. Of course, I had to pay them for that, but we crave to become what we are not. We crave not to be what we are. And we're always craving sensual pleasure. More dukkha. The cessation of dukkha comes from the reminderless fading and cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that craving. Once we let go of the craving, we don't have a problem, really. But this makes craving sound artificial, like somehow it's not natural to crave. The word the Buddha actually used is tanha, meaning thirst. Maybe you recognize it in Sanskrit, Durst, because the German word Durst comes into English as thirst, and thirst is absolutely natural. It is natural to crave sensuality, becoming, and non-becoming. That's absolutely natural. It's not natural to become obsessed and fixated on them. It is not natural to have the if only this happens, then I'll be happy. You've got to learn how to be happy in your own skin, and that leads us to the fourth noble truth. The way to stop this dukkha business from going on. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And he doesn't mean right as opposed to wrong. He means appropriate. What is appropriate for this situation? What is the right view for the circumstances that are currently arising? How much energy, resolve, do I want to put into this? What is the appropriate speech? What is the right action? What is a right livelihood? Does it harm another human being or another living being? Does it have the potential to harm in the future? Right effort, right mindfulness. How much should I pay attention? It's also called appropriate attention. And right concentration. How focused do I really need to be for what's going on? There are some situations where you have to be very focused, like when you're working with machinery. Other times, like when you're watching a TV show, not so much. Right mindfulness, what is the appropriate attention? How much attention do I really need to be paying? Well, if you're driving down a highway at 70 miles an hour, probably a lot more than you do if you're sitting on a bench. How much effort do I need to put into something? Do I go into overdrive, or am I so relaxed nothing gets done? Right speech is the one that always tickles me. You know, if I can't sit here in front of you and tell dirty jokes. That would not be appropriate. But I do have to sound like I know a thing or two about Buddhism, especially as far as these 10 perfections are concerned. But if you notice, these 8 things right here called the Eightfold Path in Buddhist parlance look a heck of a lot like these, the 10 perfections. They're all wrapped up in here. And their whole purpose is to bring us closer to reality, to help us end the suffering of ourselves and of others. Very, very interrelated concepts. Oh, I do. Mary Kinsman, how are focus and concentration different? Whoops, wrong way. Let me see what I've got here. Okay, right. Okay, concentration is focus. The concentration that is being spoken about here is meditation. The right mindfulness is appropriate attention. So right mindfulness would have to do with day-to-day focus on what's going on around you, like when you're cooking, being focused on temperatures and ingredients and things like that. Right concentration has more to do with meditation. In this case, the Sanskrit word is samadhi, which indicates a jhana practice of deep concentration through meditation object. Oh, thank you. Oh, look at that. What did the Buddha mean by rebirth, and what is distinct from reincarnation? Thank you for asking. Because that's a really good question, and a lot of Buddhist monks get this one wrong. Rebirth has to do with the idea that there is an egoless stream of consciousness, and any given moment is a rebirth of ego. And rebirth is all about ego. And the personality, for instance, the Mui that had a great time this evening giving this presentation is different than the Mui that was like really frustrated driving in here during rush hour traffic in the middle of Chicago. Two different Muis. The frustrated Mui is a rebirth of frustration. The pleased Mui is a rebirth of pleasure, because Mui has had pleasure before. So it's this idea that these emotional states keep being reborn, not necessarily the individual that is having them. Reincarnation posits a permanent, self-autonomous existence which continues from one lifetime to another. And that notion is alien to Buddhism, which makes the affirmation that nothing is autonomous and self-existent, that everything is interrelated. To be a living being is at the same time synonymous with being everything in the universe on many, many different levels. So when this being passes, this Mui does not get to be reborn in another lifetime. But the stream of consciousness out of which this personality arose will, because of causes and conditions, allow another manifestation to arise. Pushed by karma, molded by my cravings. So what is reborn is actually craving. In reincarnation, what is reborn is a soul, or a continuously autonomous being. And those are the differences between the two. Rebirth is more of a psychological statement. Reincarnation is more of a metaphysical statement. The historical Buddha did not really subscribe to the idea of reincarnation. He was merely interested in experiential reality, here and now. And as a matter of fact, the question of reincarnation was brought up many times before him, and he said, it doesn't matter who you were in the past life, or if you were in the past life. What matters is now. What is arising now? And if we can deal with that, then it doesn't matter what happens after death. And as far as that's concerned, I don't know what happens after death either, but I'll let you know when I get there. Did I answer your question? Uh-oh. Okay, thank you. Thought I was going to get a hate email out of that or something. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad the rush hour traffic is over, and have a good night.